and welcome back to the Lydia McGrew YouTube channel, where we're making common sense rigorous. Today, I want to go on talking about a video that I was commenting on last time. This was a video on the YouTube channel Inspiring Philosophy. I'll link it in the show notes, where Michael Jones of Inspiring Philosophy was giving some completely legitimate harmonizations of the resurrection accounts and was crediting these to special Greco-Roman compositional devices. In my last video, I commented on some problems with doing that with the concept of spotlighting, even though in and of itself, that concept is not problematic. It's simply a relabeling of an existing harmonization. In this video, I'm going to talk about the concept of paraphrase. Again, those of you who are familiar from a long time back with my work and my approach will find this familiar. I'm going to link in the show notes to an earlier video that I did as part of my response series last summer on paraphrase and some of the problems with paraphrase. And you'll see that I'm saying some of the same things. And I should say not problems with paraphrase as ordinarily used, but with the use of that term that the compositional device theorists will make. Several years ago, I did a debate on The Unbelievable Show with Dr. Craig Evans. If I remember, I'll link that in the show notes as well. And it was interesting how repeatedly in that debate, I would say, now, I am not trying to say that the gospel authors are recording Jesus' words absolutely verbatim. And yet it was almost as though Dr. Evans could not hear that I had said that. So at a certain point, he said, I want to ask, does Lydia believe in paraphrase? Well, for the record, yes, Lydia believes in paraphrase when we use that word in a very ordinary garden variety sense. And then sometime later, Dr. Evans did an interview where he characterized those who disagree with him. And several minutes later, my name came up, pretty clear that I was in view as believing that the gospel authors always recorded everything absolutely verbatim. So here we go with the straw man again. Even though I had said 4 times in my debate with him that that was not what I was advocating. And we got something similar in Dr. Lacona's response video last year. Now, there's a fallacy known as the Mott and Bailey. And in the Mott and Bailey approach, a person advocating a set of views, an approach, it might be scholarly, political, ideological, whatever it might be, will start out by presenting things that no one could object to, and maybe labeling them with special terminology, or maybe not, but characterizing them as representative of the set of views that he's bringing forward and advocating. And then move on when people are like, oh, that's no problem, to more questionable or controversial or surprising views and bring those forward. Then when a critic comes out and says, whoa, that's a problem, the advocate will go back to talking about the unobjectionable views. And it's like, what? Boy, you must be a real weirdo that you object to this unobjectionable stuff. And it goes back and forth like that, and that's the Mott and Bailey. And with paraphrase, we definitely have a Mott and Bailey going on. So we start with things that are extremely similar, where the differences between them are absolutely trivial. Dr. Lacona will sometimes use 2 different wordings of Jesus saying about the grain of mustard seed. I'm going to read right now the words of the angel at the tomb in Matthew and Mark, and you'll see how similar these are. Matthew, the angel, this is Matthew 28:5. The angel answered and said to the women, do not be afraid, for I know that you are looking for Jesus who has been crucified. He is not here, for he has risen just as he said. Come see the place where he was lying, and go quickly and tell his disciples that he is risen from the dead. And behold, he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him. Behold, I have told you. That's Matthew. Mark 16. And he said to them, do not be amazed. You are looking for Jesus the Nazarene, who has been crucified. He has risen. He is not here. Behold, here is the place where they laid him. But go tell his disciples and Peter, he is going before you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he said to you. So the only actual additional bits of information in Mark are the mention of Peter, and then the statement, just as he said to you, which actually links up rather nicely with Luke. We'll talk about Luke in a minute. But if you just look at Matthew and Mark, really trivial. Matthew, let's suppose that Matthew was using Mark as a source. Neither of them would have been present. Only the women were present. And so big scroll, very hard to have two big scrolls open at the same time. He's got big scroll of Mark. He reads it. He remembers, maybe he makes a few notes. He closes up the scroll and he goes to write his own. Of course, you're going to tell it somewhat in your own words. And he could easily have just forgotten the reference to Peter or as he said to you or something like that. Now that's paraphrase in an entirely unobjectionable sense. And what I like to talk about is something would be historically recognizable. So if you were standing there and you heard the angel speak to the women and you spoke and understood the language that the angel was using, you would say, oh, and you like you had Matthew and Mark, from either one of them, you could recognize that content. The content is the same and the wording is just trivially different. We get this sometimes. We could get this, as I was just suggesting, with Matthew reading Mark. We get this sometimes when different witnesses remember the scene and the evangelists have plausibly different witnesses that are the ultimate sources of it. As the theological blogger Steve Hayes said, the late theological blogger, memory is naturally paraphrastic. And I really like that statement, and I'll often use that wording that Steve used. Memory is naturally paraphrastic. And that kind of trivial paraphrase difference is not a problem. It shouldn't be any problem. As far as I know, it's never been a problem to inerrantists of the stronger stripe either. I'm not an inerrantist, but it's certainly not a problem for reliability. Notice that there's nothing heavy about this. Remember how I said in an earlier video, don't make gospel differences too complicated. It's not like Matthew is going, hey, I think I'll cut Peter out. I don't want to mention Peter and have this special reason for not mentioning Peter. Not like that. These are just casual, natural variations. Okay, so that's the kind of paraphrase that I have no slightest objection to, and that's what often people would mean by paraphrase. But now let's turn to Luke's gospel. And Luke, it's similar, but there's a kind of interesting difference. So it says, the men said to them, we talked in the last video about, yes, there were two, but obviously they're not speaking like a chorus or something. All right. And Mark focuses on one. Why do you seek the living one among the dead? This is Luke 24:5. He is not here, but he is risen. Remember how he spoke to you while he was still in Galilee, saying that the Son of Man must be delivered into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and the third day rise again. And they remembered his words. Now, there, it's adding some information that's not found in Matthew. Mark says, just as he said to you, so that's an overlap there, but Luke tells what it is in more detail that the angel said to them. It gives something additional that the angel is reminding them that Jesus said, which is the prediction that he would die and rise again, that he is saying that he made while he was in Galilee. Now, Richard Balcom, who's not even as conservative as I am, says specifically that these women were with Jesus in Galilee and that they're remembering this because they were. And that's true. The women from Galilee, there's actually an undesigned coincidence there that the synoptics repeatedly refer to the women from Galilee. So they would have actually been with Jesus in Galilee, and the angel is reminding them of what they remember that Jesus predicted. He predicted his death and resurrection. So this is actually evidence that Luke has another source. And in fact, Luke specifically names Joanna. He's the only author who names Joanna. John Wenham, the late John Wenham, talks about that in his book, Easter Enigma, that Luke is like our Joanna source. And so maybe it was Joanna or some other woman who was not giving the account to Peter or to Matthew, and remembered this additional information that the angel mentioned that Jesus had foretold while he was in Galilee, that he would die and rise again. I'm going to guess he also told them to meet him in Galilee after his resurrection while he was in Galilee. Okay, so this isn't just paraphrase. This is Luke's, it's partly paraphrase, this similar but slightly trivially different for some of the wording, but Luke actually has additional information. Now, the problem is that scholars will use the concept of paraphrase in a far more questionable way that no one would call paraphrase. And I'll give more examples in a moment. But first, I want to mention in the Inspiring Philosophy video, he has this long thing about, somewhat long, it's a short video, but about Theon and exercise books. And I treat that in The Mirror of the Mask and in my video series last summer as well. And how Michael Licona has taught us about how the ancients thought it was okay to paraphrase. And when we learn this cultural context, this can really help us. Well, let me just point out that we don't need to learn any special cultural context for the kind of extremely moderate, trivial paraphrase that you have between Matthew and Mark at all. That's something anybody might do. We don't need Theon. We don't need Plutarch. We don't need the literary device theorists. We don't need special cultural insight. That's common. That's common to different cultures. But I should also add that this is not mentioned in the Inspiring Philosophy video. When it comes to Luke, Dr. Licona theorizes that Luke actually added that bit about, remember he told you while he was in Galilee, okay, that he must be crucified and rise again. That Luke added that without historical support. Why? Because Luke is going to cut out the trip to Galilee. And according to Dr. Licona, he's very explicit about this in a debate he did with Bart Ehrman, Luke is actually going to move the first appearance of Jesus from Galilee to Jerusalem, non-factually. He really, according to Dr. Licona, probably first appeared in Galilee, even though both Luke and John say he first appeared in Jerusalem to his male disciples. He's going to move that, so he doesn't want to refer to, go to Galilee and there you will see him, as he told you. But he wants to mention Galilee because Mark mentions Galilee. So he changes the reference to Galilee to saying that it was something Jesus told them while he was in Galilee. So that's made up, in other words. Now, that's not paraphrase. That's not paraphrase. That's making stuff up and supposedly making something up as a part of a larger set of non-factual changes that Luke is making to the story. That's a lot more controversial. Dr. Licona will also use the term paraphrase for this. In the Synoptics, Jesus says, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" while he's on the cross. Following Daniel Wallace, Dr. Licona believes that John was, shall we say, inspired by "My God, why have you forsaken me?" to write that on the cross Jesus said, "I am thirsty." But in other words, if you'd been there, you wouldn't actually have seen Jesus say, "I thirst." That's non-historical. And he literally calls this a paraphrase, that John has this secret theological meaning, thirst as a spiritual thirst, even though John makes it look very literal because John has someone run and offer Jesus wine when he says, "I thirst." But that's just John's secret theological meaning. And he's paraphrasing, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" and changing it into "I thirst." Dr. Licona recently used this on a fairly recent video put out by Dallas Theological Seminary, and he called it paraphrase. That is not a paraphrase. Those two things, "My God, why have you forsaken me?" and "I thirst," do not look the same at all. And anyone reading or hearing John would have had every reason, including the original audience, to think that Jesus literally said, "I am thirsty." It's also very likely that Jesus was horribly thirsty because that was part of the torture of crucifixion. So to call that a paraphrase is very confusing. And that's, again, this Mott and Bailey, where we start out with paraphrase. Who can possibly object to paraphrase? And the gospel authors paraphrased, and John likes to paraphrase, and John really paraphrases. And by the way, John changed "My God, why have you forsaken me?" to "I thirst." What's the matter? Don't you believe in paraphrase? Okay, so this is where things go when we use something like special literary devices for something as ordinary as paraphrase. Then we can think, oh, I guess I have to accept this other thing. It's interesting in the quotations given in the Inspiring Philosophy video from Dr. Licona, there is this statement that the ancient people were allowed to change a monologue into a dialogue. Now, Inspiring Philosophy Michael Jones doesn't focus on that. He's just talking about these trivial differences between the words of the angel at the tomb and the synoptics. He doesn't get specific with that, but it's just in there in one of these quotations, changing a monologue to a dialogue. Well, I mean, that's not paraphrase either. If person A is just talking and talking, and then you come along and you say, oh, that's kind of boring, I'm going to make person B say part of this, and I'm going to kind of make it go back and forth. That's changing what happens. So somebody who reads it is going to think that more people were speaking than really were. Now, Dr. Licona thinks he can support this from the so-called exercise books. I have argued at length that is not what the exercise books are doing. They're just giving the student the opportunity to practice writing. And I talk about this more. Please get hold of The Mirror or the Mask, and also watch my video series if you're interested in more detail. Right now, I just want to point out that's not paraphrase. Okay. And also in one of the quotations he gives there is Dr. Licona's statement, the imagination of the author was welcome. Well, we see what that amounts to when it's, Luke adding or changing. He predicted his resurrection and his crucifixion while he was in Galilee, when what Mark says is just go and meet him in Galilee. And we certainly see the claim that the author's using his imagination when we have the claim that John is changing, by God, why have you forsaken me, to the entirely different, I am thirsty. So even in those quotations given in that video, there are these little things that you can kind of raise a little flag about and say, what's that all about? And this, again, is kind of how this works, that you start off with something unobjectionable, and then you use phrases like imagination was welcome or whatever. And then you bring up these other things, and people think, well, I guess I have to accept that because I've accepted this overall approach, or this scholar, I've accepted the idea that this scholar is an authority on the way that the original culture informed the writing of the Gospels. So, who am I to question this? And I want to say that this definitely can be questioned, and it's a terrible, terrible argument that John changed. It is, my God, why have you forsaken me to I thirst? There's no good argument for that. Dr. Licona brings up the idea that elsewhere in John, he only uses thirst in a metaphoric way. Well, so what? That's not an argument that here, where Jesus would have been literally thirsty, he's using it in a metaphoric way. And again, he has someone come running to give Jesus something to drink. So it definitely doesn't look like a metaphor of any kind. So I want to alert you to this use of paraphrase in very different senses, widely different senses, and to point out that it's possible to reject entirely this compositional device approach based upon argument and reasons. And please get my book if you want to see some of the arguments and reasons, without being forced to reject paraphrase in all the possible meanings that could have. So that's a false dilemma. It's a false dichotomy that, you either have to accept all of this, or you have to think that everything is absolutely verbatim, and then you're going to have contradictions. And I want to alert you to that. Okay, thanks for watching, and come back next time when I'll be talking about something else. I'm not sure what right now, but thanks for watching the Lydia McGrew YouTube channel, where we are making common sense rigorous.